Have you ever noticed how fear rises precisely when you need courage the most? That interview for your dream job, that moment before you speak to someone you admire, or that second before you make a decision that could change everything. Why does fear choose these exact moments to flood your mind? This is no coincidence. In our modern world, we've forgotten something essential. Fear doesn't arrive randomly. It appears with mathematical precision at the exact measurement of our desire. The more desperately we want something, the more terrified we become of losing it, even before we have it. Today's anxiety epidemic isn't born from genuine danger. Our ancestors feared predators and starvation, immediate threats to survival. But we fear scenarios we've constructed entirely in our minds. The presentation that might go poorly, the relationship that might end, the opportunity that might slip away. Our bodies respond to these imagined threats with the same biochemical intensity as if we were facing a predator in the wild. This is where Schopenhauer's insights become invaluable. While he never knew our high-speed, digitally connected world, he understood something timeless about human suffering. All suffering stems from desire. The German philosopher observed that life oscillates between pain and boredom. Pain when we want what we don't have, and boredom when desire momentarily subsides. Our modern anxiety is simply this ancient dynamic, playing out at unprecedented speeds. The Stoics reached similar conclusions through different paths. Seneca, advisor to emperors, recognized that suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our interpretations and expectations. We suffer more in imagination than in reality, he observed, watching how the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in Rome remained trapped in misery, despite having everything society valued. This paradox reveals a profound truth. Fear emerges when desire becomes unmanageable. We don't genuinely fear failure itself. We fear losing what we expect to gain. The job candidate doesn't truly fear the interview. They fear losing the future they've already begun to construct in their imagination. The salary, the status, the security. The speaker doesn't fear the audience. They fear losing the admiration they crave. The decision maker doesn't fear choice. They fear losing the perfect outcome they've already attached themselves to. Consider your most recent moment of anxiety. Was it the situation itself that frightened you, or what you stood to lose? This distinction changes everything. The Stoic philosophy offers a revolutionary perspective. The mind should focus exclusively on what it can control, never on outcomes. This isn't merely positive thinking. It's a complete recalibration of where we invest our mental energy. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome and devoted Stoic, reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." When we attach ourselves to results, the promotion, the relationship, the perfect outcome, anxiety inevitably follows. When we focus instead on the process, the quality of our work, the authenticity of our connections, the wisdom of our decisions, the mind finds its natural balance. This isn't simply theory, it's observable in everyday life. Watch the athlete who performs brilliantly until they begin thinking about the championship rather than the present moment. Observe the speaker who flows naturally until they start worrying about the audience's judgment rather than their message. Notice how your own mind functions clearly until it projects into imagined futures. Epictetus, once a slave who became one of history's greatest philosophical teachers, distilled this wisdom into a brilliant observation: those who desire less, fear less. Peace doesn't come from acquiring everything you want. It comes from moderating what you believe you need. This doesn't mean abandoning ambition. It means pursuing goals without attaching your worth and happiness to their achievement. Think of the last time you were completely absorbed in something, creating, solving a problem, helping someone, or simply being present in nature. In those moments, fear disappears, not because the world becomes safer, but because desire temporarily releases its grip. You weren't thinking about what you might gain or lose. You were simply engaged with what was directly before you. This offers us a radical inversion. What if fear isn't something to be eliminated, but something to be understood? What if each moment of anxiety is actually revealing what we're overvaluing? Perhaps fear isn't the enemy, but a messenger, constantly showing us where we've become attached. The executive, terrified of public speaking, isn't suffering from a communication problem, but from excessive concern about others' judgments. The person anxious about commitment isn't struggling with relationships, but with clinging to independence. The student paralyzed before exams isn't academically insufficient, but overly identified with performance. This perspective transforms our relationship with fear. Rather than trying to silence it through affirmations, medications, or avoidance, we can observe it with curiosity. What is this fear revealing about my attachments? Becomes a more valuable question than, how do I make this fear go away? Schopenhauer recognized that humans uniquely suffer because we not only experience the present, but anticipate the future and ruminate on the past. Our consciousness, our greatest gift, becomes our greatest tormentor when misused. The Stoics provided the antidote, bringing attention back to the present, focusing on what is within our control and loosening our grip on outcomes. Fear will always accompany desire. This is the human condition. But understanding their connection gives us unprecedented freedom. When you feel afraid, rather than fighting the sensation, trace it back to its source. What desire is triggering this fear? Is this something truly essential to your well-being, or have you simply convinced yourself it is? Most fears, when carefully examined, reveal themselves as attachments to things ultimately outside our control, others' opinions, future outcomes, status, validation. The Stoic practice invites us to recognize these attachments without judgment and gently redirect our attention to what truly matters: our values, our actions, our character. This redirection isn't avoidance, it's clarity. When we stop being dominated by what we might lose, we can fully engage with what we can actually contribute. The mind becomes sharper, more present, more effective. This isn't spiritual bypass, but practical wisdom for living effectively. The next time fear appears, try this perspective shift. This fear is showing me where I've become attached. What am I grasping for that I could release? This simple reflection can transform paralyzing anxiety into valuable self-knowledge. Fear becomes not an obstacle, but a guide, pointing precisely to where freedom can be found. The restless mind feeds discontent. Even after you get what you want, have you noticed how the mind quickly finds a new worry? You secure the job, then immediately worry about performing well. You enter the relationship, then fear losing it. You achieve the goal, then worry about maintaining success. This isn't coincidence or personal failure. It's the natural rhythm of an untrained mind. Schopenhauer described life as a pendulum swinging between suffering caused by desire and boredom caused by its absence. We chase what we want, briefly celebrate its attainment, then either worry about losing it or become restless for the next pursuit. The mind never arrives at lasting satisfaction because it's designed to want, not to have. This perpetual motion machine of desire and fear explains why material progress doesn't eliminate anxiety. Our ancestors would have considered our living standards miraculous, yet studies consistently show that anxiety disorders are at historic highs. More comfort, more options, and more security haven't translated to more peace, because peace was never a matter of external circumstances. The ancient Stoics recognized this dynamic millennia ago. Marcus Aurelius, despite being the most powerful man in the known world, reminded himself daily of the mind's tendency to create problems. Today, I escaped anxiety, or no, I discarded it because it was within me, in my own perceptions, not outside. Even as emperor, he understood that mental suffering originates not from events, but from judgments about events. The mental cycle follows predictable patterns. What if I'm not good enough transforms into what if I can't sustain this success, which becomes what if I lose what I've gained. The specific content changes, but the structure remains identical. The mind projecting into imagined futures where something valuable is threatened or lost. This cycle continues because we misidentify its source. We believe external circumstances create our fears, so we try to control those circumstances. But new situations simply generate new fears. The promotion brings fear of increased responsibility. Financial security brings fear of market crashes. Recognition brings fear of being exposed as fraudulent. The mind always finds something new to worry about because worry is a habit of mind, not a result of circumstances. Modern neuroscience confirms what Stoics intuited. The brain is a prediction machine, constantly scanning for potential threats. This was evolutionarily advantageous when threats were primarily physical and immediate. In our complex social world, however, this same mechanism generates endless anxiety about hypothetical futures that often never materialize. Social media exacerbates this tendency by showing us infinite possibilities and implied comparisons. We see others' curated successes and imagine ourselves failing by comparison. Even as we achieve our goals, we discover new standards of success that seem to recede like the horizon as we approach. The mind never rests because it's constantly processing new information about what could go wrong or what others might achieve that we haven't. Practicing Stoicism begins with recognizing these mental patterns. When we observe thoughts as events rather than truths, when we say, "There is fear here," rather than "I am afraid," we create crucial distance from the mind's automatic narratives. This isn't mere semantics, but a profound shift in relationship to thought. Epictetus instructed his students to distinguish between what is within their control and what isn't, then to focus exclusively on the former. Most of what generates fear falls squarely into the "not within my control" category. Others' opinions, future outcomes, external events, past mistakes. Yet these are precisely what the untrained mind obsesses over. A practical technique emerges from this insight. When fear arises, ask yourself, what am I trying to control that isn't actually in my hands? This simple question often reveals how much mental energy we invest in scenarios we cannot influence, energy that could be redirected toward what we can actually affect. Consider how this plays out in daily life. The entrepreneur worries about market conditions rather than focusing on creating value. The parent anxiously tracks developmental milestones rather than being present with their child. The artist frets about reception rather than expressing authentically. In each case, attention flows toward what cannot be controlled, creating suffering without purpose. Fear represents dissatisfaction with uncertainty. The mind craves guarantees in a world that offers none. The solution isn't to somehow secure the future, which is impossible, but to cultivate inner stability that doesn't require external certainty. Seneca pointed to this when he observed that true balance comes when the present moment suffices, and the future remains merely a possibility rather than a demand. This inner stability doesn't mean becoming passive or resigned. Rather, it means acting from clarity instead of reactivity. When we stop investing energy in controlling the uncontrollable, we have vastly more resources for engaging with what we can actually influence. The mind becomes more effective, not less. The Stoics practiced this approach through deliberate exposure to discomfort, cold baths, simple meals, occasional fasting. These weren't exercises in masochism, but training for the mind to separate circumstance from reaction. They understood that comfort makes us vulnerable to fear, while voluntary discomfort builds resilience. Modern psychology confirms this wisdom through exposure therapy. Gradually facing fears dissipates their power. What we resist persists. What we embrace transforms. The fear we run from grows stronger. The fear we turn toward and examine grows weaker. This transformative insight applies to all forms of anxiety. When we feel professional anxiety, we can ask, what aspect of this situation can I actually control? How can I invest my energy there? When relationship anxiety arises, we can inquire, what part of this dynamic is actually mine to address? When financial fears emerge, we can determine what concrete steps are within my power. This redirection requires practice. The mind has spent years, perhaps decades, habitually focusing on what it cannot control. Changing this pattern demands consistent, patient effort, not unlike physical training. We don't expect physical strength after one workout. Similarly, we shouldn't expect mental transformation after one attempt at stoic redirection. Regular meditation supports this transformation by strengthening our ability to observe thoughts rather than becoming them. The practice of watching the mind without attachment gradually reveals how many of our fears are simply habitual thought patterns rather than accurate responses to reality. With time, we learn to recognize the early signs of unproductive worry and redirect attention before anxiety fully develops. Another powerful practice involves purposefully contemplating worst-case scenarios, not to increase fear, but to reduce it through realistic assessment. Seneca recommended regularly imagining losing possessions, status, even loved ones, not out of morbidity, but to recognize our inherent capacity to withstand difficulty. This negative visualization paradoxically increases appreciation while decreasing attachment. The ultimate aim isn't to eliminate fear, an impossible and unnecessary goal, but to develop a new relationship with it. Fear becomes information rather than identity. We notice there's fear arising about this presentation, rather than becoming a person who fears public speaking. This subtle shift creates space for choice rather than automatic reaction. With consistent practice, we discover something remarkable. Most fears never materialize, and those that do are rarely as devastating as imagined. The mind's predictions about future suffering are almost always exaggerated. When we track our fears over time, we find that the vast majority were wasted energy, solving problems that never arrived. The restless mind will always generate new concerns. This is its nature. But we can learn to relate to these concerns differently, with curiosity rather than identification, with perspective rather than absorption. We can recognize the mind's tendencies without being governed by them. Serenity is not weakness, it's clarity. We search for peace everywhere except where it actually resides. We pursue success believing it will bring security. We accumulate knowledge thinking it will provide certainty. We seek validation, imagining it will offer worth. Yet the peace that eludes us isn't hiding in achievements, answers, or approval. It exists only in the acceptance of life's fundamental conditions, including its inherent uncertainty. This acceptance isn't resignation or passivity. It's the most profound form of clarity, seeing reality precisely as it is, without the distortions of desire or fear. When Schopenhauer wrote about silencing the will as the path to liberation from suffering, he wasn't advocating for abandoning all action, but for acting from truth rather than craving. The Stoic philosophers expressed this same insight differently. They understood that trying to control external events is futile, while mastering our internal responses is entirely possible. This distinction between what depends on us and what doesn't forms the cornerstone of Stoic practice and offers a revolutionary approach to fear. Marcus Aurelius, leading an empire while practicing philosophy, reminded himself, "You are disturbed not by events, but by your judgment about events." This insight isn't merely theoretical, it transforms how we experience life's inevitable challenges. The same circumstances that crush one person can strengthen another, depending entirely on their interpretation. Consider how this applies to everyday fears. The fear of rejection in relationships isn't about the other person's response, but about the meaning we attach to it. The fear of failure in work isn't about the outcome, but about the story we tell ourselves about what that outcome represents. The fear of uncertainty isn't about the unknown itself, but about our belief that we need to know in order to be safe. When we recognize these interpretations as choices rather than facts, we discover unprecedented freedom. We can choose different meanings. Rejection can become redirection. Failure can become education. Uncertainty can become possibility. These aren't mere optimistic reframes, but legitimate alternative perspectives, equally valid ways of interpreting reality. A practical technique emerges from this understanding. Instead of resisting what you cannot change, redirect your energy toward what depends on you. If you fear public speaking, you cannot control the audience's reaction, but you can thoroughly prepare your content and practice delivery. If you fear relationship disappointment, you cannot ensure another's feelings, but you can show up authentically and communicate clearly. If you fear professional setbacks, you cannot guarantee outcomes, but you can consistently deliver quality work. This redirection isn't about ignoring fear, but about responding to it strategically. The Stoic approach doesn't deny emotions, it integrates them into rational action. Fear becomes information rather than an obstacle. It signals what matters to us and where attention might be needed without determining our behavior. This is where true courage emerges. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but action in its presence. The Stoic doesn't pretend to be fearless, they simply refuse to be governed by fear. They feel the same human emotions as everyone else, but maintain sovereignty over their responses. This is strength far greater than fearlessness. Ancient Stoic practices offer remarkably effective tools for developing this capacity. The practice of premeditatio malorum, deliberately envisioning difficulties before they arrive, builds psychological immunity to setbacks. By mentally rehearsing challenges, we develop contingency plans and emotional readiness that prevent paralysis when real obstacles emerge. Similarly, the practice of memento mori, remembering one's mortality, puts smaller fears into proper perspective. When we regularly contemplate the finite nature of life, petty anxieties about status, appearance, or temporary setbacks naturally diminish. What remains are the truly significant concerns: living with integrity, contributing meaningfully, and connecting authentically. Modern psychology validates these ancient practices through techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy, which similarly distinguishes between events and interpretations. What the Stoics discovered through philosophical inquiry, contemporary science confirms through empirical research. Our experience depends less on what happens and more on how we frame what happens. The application of these insights transforms daily life. Professional challenges become opportunities to demonstrate character rather than threats to status. Personal conflicts become occasions for understanding rather than battles to win. Health concerns become reminders of life's preciousness rather than simply sources of anxiety. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. Like any profound change, it requires consistent practice and patient application. The mind has habitual patterns developed over decades. Redirecting these patterns demands repetition and reinforcement. Each time we pause between stimulus and response, questioning our automatic interpretations, we strengthen our capacity for Stoic clarity. Epictetus, who experienced both slavery and freedom, understood that true liberty exists in the mind rather than in external circumstances. Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens, he advised. This balanced approach neither denies reality nor surrenders to it. It engages skillfully with what life presents. As we cultivate this skill, we discover an unexpected truth. Serenity isn't weakness, but profound strength. The person who remains steady amid chaos isn't detached from reality, but more deeply connected to what matters. They waste no energy fighting what cannot be changed and invest fully in what can be influenced. This economy of attention creates remarkable effectiveness. Consider how differently we operate when freed from unnecessary fear. Without social anxiety, we connect more authentically. Without performance anxiety, we work more creatively. Without existential anxiety, we live more purposefully. Fear doesn't protect us, it constrains us. Reasonable caution serves life, persistent anxiety diminishes it. The final Stoic insight brings us full circle. Life will inevitably include loss, failure, and circumstances beyond our control. This isn't pessimism, but realism. By accepting these conditions rather than fighting them, we gain remarkable freedom. We still experience pain, disappointment, and grief, but we suffer less because we've stopped demanding that reality be different than it is. This acceptance reveals the ultimate paradox. True security comes not from controlling circumstances, but from developing the inner resources to respond wisely to any circumstance. The person who needs things to go their way remains perpetually vulnerable. The person who can navigate whatever comes possesses unshakable strength. As Epictetus taught, genuine freedom arrives when no one, not even our own fears, has power over our inner state. We retain the capacity to choose our perspective regardless of external conditions. This isn't pretending that everything is good, but recognizing that meaning remains ours to determine even when circumstances are challenging. In this understanding, fear loses its dominance without losing its information. It no longer dictates our choices, but simply offers data about what we value. We can acknowledge it, learn from it, and still choose our path with clarity rather than reactivity. The Stoic journey doesn't promise a life without difficulties. It offers something far more valuable, the capacity to meet any difficulty with wisdom, courage, and inner freedom. This isn't escaping reality, but engaging it more fully, with all our human faculties aligned toward effective living rather than scattered by fear. The fear will continue knocking at your door. The difference is, will you open it and be consumed, or will you observe it from a distance, like the Stoic who understands their mind and governs their reactions? If this reflection has touched you, consider, which fear are you ready to dissolve with clarity and reason? The path to freedom doesn't require eliminating fear, only recognizing that it has never been your master unless you allowed it to be. Remember, as Seneca observed, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. To T, perhaps the greatest liberation comes not from changing the world, but from changing the lens through which we view it, transforming threats into challenges, obstacles into opportunities, and fear into information that serves rather than imprisons. Fear will continue knocking at your door throughout your life. The question is, will you let it control you, or will you observe it with the calm clarity of a Stoic who understands their mind and governs their reactions? Which fear has been holding you back from living fully? What would change if you started seeing it as information rather than a threat? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear which fear you're ready to face with new understanding. Please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content that integrates ancient wisdom with modern challenges.